A lot of experience, and we're happy to have Billy Schmitz here. Let's give him a quick round of applause introduction, and then we'll get into the talk. So.
All right, so state of the industry, and I like to take this back to the cycle lows of 2015 to 2019, all right? Because from 2015 to 2019, things were fairly normal, what I would call normal in my world, all right? What I do, so I do risk management for 5 Rivers. I've been with the company for 18 years, 12 of those years, 13 of those years I've been in risk management. What the heck is a risk manager, right? Well, we take on futures position to mitigate risk. Price goes too high, we want to make sure we can lever that. Price goes too low, we want to make sure that we've sold enough contracts positions, right? So 2019, that really changed. Didn't really know how good we had it, and through the course of 2019 to now, we had 100-year events, we had 50-year events, we had things happen that, none of us could probably have possibly foreseen. I'm going to go through some of that, kind of lay out that timeline of how things have really changed in our industry. Go through some industry topics, points of contention, debate. Maybe you have an opinion on this, maybe you don't, but I hope to just share my perspective, the industry's perspective on some of those issues. And then, of course, we'll get into supply and demand, right? I can't sit here and give you market outlook without talking about supply and demand. Okay, so to understand where we are going, we have to appreciate and understand where we have been, right? And so again, out of the cycle low, and when I talk about the cycle low, I'm talking about total cattle numbers, all right? Cattle on feed, cows, calves, dairy cows, et cetera. So from the cycle low to roughly 2019, I think we all remember the Holcomb fire, right? Took out all that capacity in southwest Kansas. Some people may want to think coincidental or not so coincidental. We've had a series of plant fires after that. Grand Island, I think that was 21. Fort Morgan recently this past spring of 22. Those didn't have the same impact that Holcomb had, but certainly opened our eyes to an aging infrastructure in the packing industry, right, to say the least. So from there, 2019, Trump was our president. From 16 to 20, like him, love him, hate him. His phase 1 trade deal opened up the door to China, all right? There's no way around it. Greg Dowden and his team did phenomenal things. They provided a trade deal for the United States that lifted age restrictions on beef exports to China. They were able to negotiate a trade deal where third-party verification was no longer needed. The United States system of verification was accepted. So these were brand new. These are trade deals that nobody else that trades with China was able to get, right? So 2020, we had the phase 1 trade deal. 2020, we also transitioned into COVID. Don't have to explain that, right? Packer margins, wholesale prices got incredibly high. Fed cattle prices got incredibly low. Retail kind of went along with wholesale too, right? And as I go through the slides, I think you're going to see too, I think we learned to do some things that have really helped beef consumption. We ate more at home. We couldn't eat out. We took a lot of food, delivery-wise. But I think we did some things. We learned some things in terms of how to utilize certain cuts of meat better, okay? So COVID 2020 kind of lagged into 21. Then in 21, we got into the drought, right? Something we're all very excited to finally, I think, be out of, okay? 21, 22, we get into post-COVID, the downsizing of spending, the repercussion of some of those dollars. I know there could be a debate on that. What is actually causing inflation? The Federal Reserve got it wrong. Wasn't entirely supply chain issues, right? There was a little more to it than that. But now we've come to this period of higher inflation and not necessarily the highest interest rates we've ever seen. And I think that's a key word. These aren't the highest rates we've ever seen, but they went up fast and they went up hard, right? And we're also now, as we get kind of 21, 22, now into 23, we see a lot more regulation, and maybe regulation isn't the right word. Maybe it's more so policies, right? Let me begin with one that we see that's kind of affected us roughly the last 2 or 3 years has been energy. Okay, at the moment we still have this E15 policy. All right, so first and foremost, it's 15% blend of ethanol into gasoline. Well, I guess we could make some debate about it globally, but if you look at the numbers in the United States, we really peaked gas consumption roughly 2016. For the last 4 or 5 years, COVID had some influence on that. We really haven't used any more gas in this country, all right? What do you need, if you're gonna make ethanol, what do you need as part of that process? You need gasoline, all right? It does not, in my opinion, from our research, I don't think it really matters how high ethanol margins go. You gotta have gasoline to blend it with. The best correlation of ethanol production comes with gasoline usage, all right? Now we can also have some debate, we can have some discussion on electric vehicles. Is it gonna happen? I can make a very valid argument that I don't know if we have all the materials to displace all the cars in the United States and the world with electronic vehicles, all right? Regardless, there are approximately 1 to 2 million electric vehicles on the road that roughly displace the use of corn ethanol. We peak corn ethanol usage at about 5.6 billion bushels in, I believe, 16, 17. Also the year we peak gasoline usage, all right? I think it's gonna be hard to see corn to ethanol get much above 5.2 to 5.3 over the next couple years. However, all right, there's this little thing called sustainable aviation fuel. That's not really in the market right now, but it is being heavily pushed. The only ones who really aren't, quote unquote, doing much of anything to get a cleaner footprint, if you will, is the aviation industry. I think we could potentially see some of that corn that was displaced in the automotive industry go to the aviation industry. Along with that, what we saw is, in a move to use more sustainable fuels, loss of tallow in our rations, right? So basically in roughly 2021, price of tallow went off, or went incredibly high. And ironically, as we're trying to use less resources as a country and as an industry, all right, tallow priced itself out of the ration. If you're a cattle feeder, feeding tallow is an absolute necessity, right, Mark? I mean, you need fat, you need energy to get cattle to eat and to gain, all right? So we took tallow out of the ration, and ironically, because it priced itself out, so ironically, we had to use more corn. So, these are just some of the things, some of the policies. I don't know if I want to say it's regulation, but some of the policies that we see. The other thing too, I don't mean to get up here and get on an energy grandstand. I've probably spent way too much time on this slide, right, Jackie? The other thing that's been interesting, to say the least, challenging, frustrating, within the energy policy framework, and we can cuss and curse ERCOT too, Texas, but when I look across our yards, our yard in Arizona, which is going to be priced off the California market, our yard in Idaho, which is priced off the California market, their natural gas prices have not come down from $10 to $20 per MCF, and maybe that doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but it's kind of like a dollar per gallon acronym, if you will. Their natural gas prices have been $10 to $20 per MCF, let's call it per gallon, for the last 2 to 3 years. I don't see that changing. It's hard to compete in those regions. Think about where we've added some packing capacity, right, up in the Pacific Northwest. They're going to be subject to the same gas prices that we are. So if you're talking about natural gas prices for an operation that's got to flake a lot of their corn that are 3 to 5 times higher than the industry. So some of the issues as it pertains directly to marketing, we've been kicking around, discussing. Some of it's been amicable, some not so much, right? Cash trading, formula marketing arrangements, what is an acceptable level of cash trade? There was the 50-14 bill, so 50% of our cattle, this was a bill put forward, didn't pass. 50% of our cattle that traded within a 14-day period, that was one of the bills that was put forward, kind of transformed, if you will, into like a 30-14 type of mandate, so 30% and within 14-day delivery. And then within all that, we had this Cattle Market Transparency Act, right? More information, okay? And I'm all for it. That's what I do. I need information, I need data, okay? But I think the one challenge that I'd put to each and every one of us is what information and what data do we need? When you look at USDA AMS reports, Agricultural Marketing Service, there are 1,000 cattle and beef reports, and it's packer to feeder, 1,000. There are 300 grain, pork, and chicken reports, right? I'm not saying we have all the information we need, but we're heavily concentrated within those middle 3 tiers. I could make a valid argument that I think we need more information from the retail sector. Anybody that looks at it, you go onto the USDA website, You got the featuring information, you got the price information that's very vague. I think a logical next step might be to gather more information from the retail level down. What are they actually getting for various brands, for various types of programs that we sell cattle into, right? At the retail level. So it's being aware of the information that we want, but I think it's also being aware of knowing what we have in our hands, right? Cattle contract library, is anyone familiar with it? Raise your hands. Anyone use it? Familiar with it? Right? I think it's a good tool, very informative. I think some of the information in there can be found in other reports, but helpful nonetheless. But I think the important thing is because when I go to these seminars, when I talk to our producers, I'm not sure anybody really understands how to use it, all right? So as we want more transparency and we want more information, let's make sure we're educating ourselves. Let's make sure we're asking and wanting the right information, okay? The other item that's been brought up, put forward is a change in regulation, the PNS Act 202. So that's basically, instead of demonstrating harm to an industry or a group of individuals, you would only have to show harm to one individual. So that really dramatically changes, what we call competition or not competition. Okay. But I would say the most significant thing that happened, and these are all things that kind of happened out of 2019, out of COVID, Holcomb, if you will. It's basically been more money to the packing industry. I've listed about, what do I have there, probably 7 or 8. These are the ones that received over $1 million. The Beef Poultry Processing Expansion Program, $223 million. $73 million of it, I don't have all of them listed there, $73 million worth went directly to grants. So grants on a loan never has to be paid back, all right? These are some of the top 7 or 10 that got over $1 million, all right? So we know because of the bottleneck that was created during COVID, right? We couldn't get employees to plants. We couldn't run the supply chain properly. We choked down choked down the capacity to process cattle, but the cattle were still there. Packers made a lot of money. The government gave them a lot of money, okay? So again, out of the lows, we saw retail prices go to $7, $8. They'll probably get to $8 at least within the next year or two. Wholesale prices get to $3 and $4. Cattle prices have been slow to come out of it. I'd say 20 to 22. It's taken us about 2 years to kind of clear some of this backlog of cattle. But now cattle prices are finally starting to catch up. So I just wanted to lay out, I think we've all kind of seen, a packer margin chart. So I wanted to show you some different slides, some different bits of information today. So I'm looking at packer margins, cattle feeding margins, cow-calf margins, and kind of my rough estimate for retail margins, all right, for the last 10 or 12 years. And the thing that stands out to me is if you look at retail margins, yeah, we know packer margins went very high. But the thing that stands out to me is retail margins. Retail margins have been very consistent. It makes it very easy to make a business plan. It makes it very easy to plan for the future, all right? Retail margins have been wide. They've been very favorable. I think it goes back to demonstrating might be better if we had a little more information about what exactly happens at that final level to the consumer. The other thing I'd point out on this is if you look at, I'm a cattle feeder. I'm more of a hobby cow-calf operator, so you'll have to forgive me. But as a cattle feeder, we're trying to make, $20, $40 a head, maybe $40 in a good year on cattle. All right. So historically, we're making 2 to 5% on our money. So by that I mean let's take the P&L, let's divide it by the total cost of the input. Right. So 2 to 5%. What are interest rates now for us? 7. Right. They're 7%. With the move in interest rates alone, we potentially wiped out any of the profit opportunity we could have in cattle. So I just wanted to bring this up. I think prices will be favorable, all right? We've got some leverage back from the packer. They've added capacity into this lower supply, all right? But we're going to be a little challenged, I think, financially. I want to be friendly cattle prices, but it's not only high interest rates, it's the ability to get funding. Just talking to Mark Anderson earlier, I don't remember the last time we'd have been even close to paying $2,000 for a yearling. We're all there now. I mean, we're all of, $2.50. It's about $2,400 for a yearling. I remember when we were selling fed cattle for that. So it's not just supply, it's not just high rates, it's the ability to get financing. It's really constraining balance sheets, okay? Well, let's go back to packing margins, and what happened coming out of that, all right? We know there are a series of regional plants that are getting built. There are some plants that were older that are getting updated. One way to find out, exactly where they're at, what's happening, what's going on is looking at the USDA data, all right? Maybe not from 50,000 feet, but let's get a little more granular, all right? So when you look at USDA government data, public, available to anybody, you can look at commercial slaughter, all right? Commercial is everything. It's not backyard flocks or cattle or calves or whatever it is you may slaughter there on the farm, but it includes state packing plants, all right? They'll fall under the NPR threshold. They'll fall under the FSIS threshold, all right? But they get noted into government federal level numbers, okay? So what I'm getting at is that difference between the cattle that are federally inspected, essentially for export, pay the grader to come in and inspect it, put the USDA grade on it. There's more commercial slaughter now than there is FSIS, right? That means some of these smaller regional plants are up and running. They're accounting for a bigger share of our total slaughter. So you've got FSIS, all the plants that are government inspected, and you've got NPR, because not everybody that goes into the FSIS number, or not everybody that's in NPR would go into the FSIS number, okay? That, the cattle, and by that, NPR, all right, mandatory price reporting, that's how we determine value, that's how we determine price for cattle. The amount of cattle that are showing up into that bucket is even smaller, all right? We can have some discussion, we can have some disagreement, we can cuss and praise each other, but I think that's some of the reason we're seeing a little bit of the disparity in prices north to south, right? A lot of the capacity has been added up north. And the easiest way to look at that is as a Packer, as a Cargill, as a Tyson, as a JBS, all right? You may have been buying feed yard XYZ's cattle, 2 to 3 years ago. They still have cattle, but they're not going to Tyson, Cargill, and National. They're going somewhere else. So now that I've got off my topics, my industry issues, let's talk a little bit about supply. And drought's obviously been the key. And we all talk about El Nino, La Nina. And in a nutshell, La Nina means it's drier, hotter, not favorable to expansion. El Nino means it's wetter, cooler. We tend to get, a better opportunity to turn cattle out on grass. Has anybody ever wondered what the heck they mean by Nino 3.4? I'm only throwing this up just just show you how smart I am when it comes to weather, which I'm not, all right? It's just a part on the equator where they say they get the best information on El Nino, La Nina trends, all right? This 3.4 region, if you can see on my chart up there, it's kind of right in the middle of the Pacific along the equator. So everybody is saying, we're out of La Nina, we're out of hot, dry conditions, we're in El Nino. Well, we may be, but there's now this other thing that we have to watch. It's called the Pacific decadal oscillation, all right? I didn't know about this, but we work with the weather team. They do a phenomenal job, and they by and large been right. They said you got to keep an eye on this negative PDO, all right? So with La Nina, and I don't go off on a tangent, but now instead of just watching temperatures along the equator, apparently we need to be watching temperatures in the North Pacific and what the waters are like. I wish my laser worked, but if you look along the west coast of California up into the PNW, so if it's hot in the North Pacific, if it's cold along the west coast of the United States, that's a negative PDO. It tends to induce dry conditions probably where we don't want them. And so if you look at my topsoil percent of moisture map, yes, we've improved, but I don't think we're through the woods. So yes, we're out of La Nina into El Nino, but there are other things we need to be aware of, okay? So with the low in cattle numbers in 14, we got to keep in mind there's a lag effect, right? Low in cows, calves drop and they're available to the feed yard approximately a year later. We didn't really see the low and on feed numbers till roughly 2015. So we put more cattle into feed yards, ramped up to 2019, and we kind of just drug it out, right, through this drought period. Now, and I know my charts are hard to read, sorry, I just want to give you as much information, all right? But now we're finally getting to the point where we're putting a few less heifers on feed. Heifer on feed numbers are coming down, but they're still extremely elevated. I don't think we're placing a few less heifers onto feed, but not a lot. The rate of female slaughter has been high, a lot of cows, a lot of heifers, right? If we're gonna retain, we're gonna have to do it in the last 4 months of the year. I'm not willing to bet the farm that happens just yet. We're getting there, but I'm not convinced we're there yet, okay? So let's look at the turnover, the older ones, the cows, right? And generally, as a rule of thumb, what we found is when that's roughly 14%. So take the total number of cows in inventory, divided by the annual slaughter, it's about 14%, right? When that number gets close to 14% or under, we're finally holding them back. We're finally starting to grow the herd, right? But I think you got to be a little careful because there's a little difference in the data. The cow turnover rate, the beef cow turnover rate hasn't really changed. The lows tend to be around 8%. The highs got high now, I think for a variety of reasons. We held some cows over, we had drought, okay? But I think by and large, the lows are gonna stay around 8% turnover. We're not there yet, we're not even close. The dairy cow industry is a little different. We turn them faster, now it's about a third, all right? So we're flipping the dairy cows about every 3 years. Okay, so 14% I think still a good general rule of thumb, just something we need to be aware of, okay? What we talked about, right, we talked about the dry conditions. We still have a lot of heifers on feed, and it doesn't look like, if you recall my percent of heifers through the sale barn, all right, it looks like we're still taking a lot to the sale barn. We're still selling a lot, it looks like to us, all right? We could debate, we could argue that, you know, maybe the last few months of the year will hold some back. I can't argue against it. Doesn't look like it to me. I think this is a year, so the blue bars should have been last year. The black bars represent a forecast. So first black bar is what I think we'll see on January 1 of 24, maybe a few more. We've slaughtered a lot of dairy cows, so I think a lot of the replacements we'll see will come from the dairy industry. But it's not gonna be enough. It's not gonna be enough to really, you know, see a big heifer retention number. Similar story with heifers, right? I just don't think, I think the conditions have been too dry, and I think we still have too many on feed to really see significant growth just yet. So what does that mean? All right, that means I think, all right, you got to keep in mind too what's happening. We're still liquidating a fairly significant amount of cows. Lean prices are high, all right? Australia is just now coming back, all right? Nobody's really supplying the world with a lot of lean beef right now. It's coming, but it's slow to come. There's still an incentive to sell cows. I think the turnover rate probably can still stay high enough, if not for a variety of reasons. For that reason alone, there's still good value in selling cows, all right? I think the turnover rate can stay high enough. It can't come down fast enough to where we really see the bottom in numbers, I don't think, until 2026. So fewer numbers, when we see the inventory report on January 1 of this year, we didn't retain enough heifers, don't think we will going into this year, all right? So I think it's another year where we see supplies down. And again, keep in the back of your mind how that works out in terms of slaughter. It's gonna be lagged about a year, okay? So I think we probably see, again, the black bars are forecast if you can't see my chart very well. Steer and heifer slaughter, I think we're probably gonna see at least another 2, maybe 3 years, maybe 4, all right? If El Nino's quick to come in and go out and we get back into La Nina, this drought goes on, we'll continue to see fewer and fewer numbers. At this point, I'm not willing to bet the farm on it, all right? The good news is with higher packer margins, all right? So what I do here is just make a rough calculation of what I think absolute max capacity could be in the packing plants. Granted, they may not run at this, but I think this is roughly what they could do all in. All right, we have grown packing capacity, fed packing capacity incredibly off the cyclical lows. Right? I think we may be at a point now too where we're at or above 2013 when we last took out a lot of packing capacity in Plainview, right? This is a chart I wanted to make sure I added too, Jackie, all right? So we're getting leverage back from the packer. For the remainder of the year, I think it stays. I mean, and you can see from the chart here, we got record low, incredibly low. We're getting that back, we're getting more back to normal, and I think we easily get back to the record levels 2014, 2013, maybe higher. Okay, so talked about supply in general. Let's go into a little more of the detail, all right? Where are some of the opportunities, where's some of the value at, all right? We don't have great information on that after I just said we have a lot of information, ironically, but we can at least discern that we are feeding more cattle for programs. We look at the USDA comprehensive, all right? We went from, roughly 20, geez, I can't even see, 10, 15%, right? Now it's 20, 30% of the kill that gets turned in to NPR are branded type programs. Now it's leveled out, and I think not necessarily recession economy-wise, but I think inflationary-wise, right? Cost of goods, cost of food. I think we're probably at a point where we've capped that market, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, okay? So with Five Rivers since 2010, we fed into about 10 different programs. We still are feeding into about 7 of those. They're all value add. They're great opportunities. They're great ways to add value to your calves, to your feeder cattle, whatever it is, okay? We just need to be aware as producers, or as a cattle feeder, all right, The difference in return, the difference in what it costs and what I can get for those animals tends to garner even a higher potential loss or potential gain from a regular commodity animal. Now, from roughly 2018 forward, and this is our data, all right, so what I'm looking at here is what a break-even cost in 2010, right, on January 1 of 2010, to what the break-even is now on a conventional and a program animal to the last closeout I would have taken, all right? So closeout information, the blue line would represent the program cattle. So for years and years, we've had break-evens that have been, from 2010 to that point, have been much higher than commodity cattle, all right? It's gotten a little better, but I guess what I would argue now into tighter supplies, those program cattle, again, the markets, probably not much more growth into high inflation, and I think the cost opportunity is going to be a little limited too for cattle feeders. All right, so it's a challenge. It's a challenge now, but I see it as a future opportunity. I don't think it's going away. I don't think it's going to get smaller. We're probably just plateauing program numbers for a minute here too. Another challenge, maybe an opportunity, is just the simple fact there's going to be fewer beef-type animals available as a cattle feeder. We know it. We're aware of it. We see it in what we have to buy, and we certainly see it in the data. Okay, so this is just a model that I kind of back into. You can agree, disagree with me. That's fine. I understand. But I do think as we move forward, we'll obviously see a higher and higher percentage of the cattle on feed that are going to be dairy or a beef on dairy mix. But is it opportunity? All right. As I mentioned, we've been about 9.3 to 9.5 million dairy cows in the United States. There's 2 countries that are doing incredibly crazy and insane things right now. And the Dutch government has flat out said what they plan to do with managing nitrification, nitrogen leaching is they're either going to buy the farmers out or they're going to get rid of it. In a nutshell, what the Dutch have said is we produce so much food, we don't need to export it. All right, we're done. European Union is the largest exporter of dairy products. Within the EU, the Netherlands is third, fourth, right? They are very high up. I think they're done. We see that in a lot of the pork numbers. I think dairy is getting there. New Zealand's number 2. Similar situation. I won't bore you with this. If anybody wants to look at the presentation, I'm more than happy to share it, all right? But basically, they're going to limit nitrogen usage, all right? Now, it may a lot of the dairies down there are pastoral. They don't get put into pens or into a yard like our dairy cows would. They're going to pull them off grass, all right? Or they're going to have to downsize the dairies, and they may switch to beef, all right? Because the dairies need a lot of employees, all right? So you got 2 of the most significant dairy producing countries in the world that probably are going to produce less. The United States finally go from 9.5 to 10. Does it matter? Another 500,000 dairy cows? I don't know, but it's definitely an opportunity. All right, U.S. total milk exports, very near 5-year highs. Dairy margins have been poor. Grain, hay prices have been very high. Remains to be seen, but I think it's something we need to be aware of. So let's talk a little bit about demand, and really can bucket it into two different buckets, really, domestic and international. And in the United States, where about 85-90% of our utilization comes from U.S. consumers, most of my focus today will be on what we see for domestic consumption. Prior to COVID, we all spent, and this is BEA data, all right, government level data, about 11% of our income went to food, okay? COVID, inflation, supply chain issues, all right? The data's flat out saying now we spend 12% of our income on food. Income's gone up, cost of food's gone up more, all right? But I think what we found, what we saw, I talked about it earlier, if you look at the red and the black line on the bottom chart, all right, the black line represents on a per capita basis, 30, all right, thank you. So the black line represents on a per capita basis how much of our food spend goes to food at home, all right? So our grocery spend, the red line represents the market share of our food dollars spent away at home, or away from home, excuse me, all right? So we knew prior to COVID they were narrowing, coming closer and closer together, all right? Now we're at a point where we actually are 50% or maybe a little more of our food expenditure is away from home. Tends to be higher value, higher price, right? But I think it still remains to be seen because we are in an inflationary time. How sustainable will that be? Will the growth continue? Will it slow? Will it flatline? Okay. Given the headwinds that we have, I think the answer is fairly obvious. It's not going to continue to go higher and higher. We may be in a period where it's relatively flat here for a moment. But I do think in COVID we learned to do some things. We learned how to better prepare, make beef in particular. I think I saw something where the sales of Traeger grills went through the roof, right? Hard to get that information, ironically, right? Because we don't have that information from retail. But I just know, anecdotally, I guess, I think we do some things different, some things better that have helped consumption, okay? And I think what we need to get away from, maybe this is just me being too personal about it in looking at this for 15 years, trying to correlate price to supply and all that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. What has worked, and I could be proven wrong, is spending, right? I do think, when you think about it, remember when a bag of chips actually had a bag of chips in it, right? Now it's got about a third. You get a bag this big and it's got a third of chips in it. It's portion control. Gets too high, we'll just sell you less. I think that's all it's coming down to, okay? So from 1990, I think these are some interesting statistics. From 1990 to now, per capita supply on average has gone down, right? The chart shows it. It's gone down. And I think a lot of people want to believe, oh, we're just eating less beef. We don't want beef, right? I don't think that's entirely the story, all right? Let's break it down into time periods, last 15 years, last 10 years, all right? Per capita supply has started to slow. Now in the last 10 years, it's started to come back up. But what's happened? We got to break it down into per capita supply. It's the amount of beef available or amount of beef produced divided by the number of people in the United States. It's that simple, okay? So beef production, all right, has gone up. It has trended higher, all right, 30 years, 15 years, 10 years. But population growth has not kept up to the same extent that beef production has. I'm not saying that's the only reason that per capita supply isn't taking off, but it is certainly some of the reason. It has probably helped too, and I think that's something we need to be aware of. A lot of the developed world, China, the European Union, consumers of beef, right? The population growth is slowing. It's India and some of the other African nations right now that are starting to grow population-wise year on year. I think those are just some of the things we need to keep in mind, okay? So it's hard to argue, right? Same methodology. Let's look back for the last 30 plus years. Per capita income, what we all make per person on average, all right, has gone up 3.5% to almost 4%, whether you look at it over 30 years or 10 years. Beef consumption's done the same, beef expenditures per capita supply times the price of beef, retail beef. It's done that or exceeded it. Seems like beef demand's pretty good to me. As long as our incomes continue to grow, I think beef consumption, beef prices can continue to go higher, okay? Well, what about alternative meats? What about plant-based meats? What about the cell-based meat, all right? Got this from Brett Stewart and Simon Quilty with Global Agri-Trends. I don't know if anybody you follow them, but I highly recommend it. They cover the global markets very well. Got this from them, and in a nutshell, what it shows from this, it's an IRI study from 201 Analytics. We see changes, we see slight increases now and then, but vegans, vegetarians, flexitarians, vegans, vegetarians have been, what, 5? I don't have my glasses. It's a very small percent. It is not growing, and it hasn't grown in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I do think our state associations, love them, hate them, cuss them, like them, whatever, have done an incredible job of getting the right information in front of consumers. Same cannot be said for countries in Germany, in the EU, certainly not in New Zealand, all right? I think some of what has helped us through this is just getting the right information to the users, okay? Retail prices are high, won't deny that, okay? Choice select spread is still near or at record highs. Prime choice spread, Those record high, it's come in. What I'm getting at here is, and I think this goes back to that, where our food dollar is going to be spent, away from home, at home. All right, we're seeing some kinks in the armor, but again, I go back to our expenditures. It's not all doom and gloom. I think it's still fairly solid, and it's going to be good into tighter supplies, right? All right, so now let's talk a little bit about beef exports, okay? Beef prices have gone higher, undoubtedly, okay? Beef prices have been on the rise in a lot of the South American countries. Prices in general, and inflation's been high in South America in general, right? There's a slide there showing per capita consumption in other countries, all right? South America eats a lot of beef. They're on the decline. The only countries that are growing are Asian, okay? So, yes, while beef consumption per capita is declining in the world globally, it is increasing in the countries, in the Asian countries that we want it to, right? They tend to be big consumers of boneless chilled beef, and that's what we supply. And again, United States, because we're so heavily oriented to our domestic consumption, all right, I think what we'll find is in years when we have less supply, instead of exporting 13, 14% of our production, it's going to go down to maybe 9 or 10, all right, in fewer numbers. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, all right, but it's not as significant as when we grow the herd. Yeah, when the numbers come back, I think we get right back to 12, 13%. But the key is, where are we going to target our growth? We do not participate in the frozen boneless market, all right? The world trades boneless frozen beef. It's 60, what do I have there? 80, 90% of what we trade is boneless. 60% of that is frozen. And another, what do I have? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's 20-some% is boneless fresh. We are the largest supplier of boneless fresh beef. It's higher value, so I don't think we want to participate in the frozen boneless market, okay? The challenge will be, though, China is typically, China is going to be the biggest buyer, the biggest market for frozen boneless, okay? We need to continue to work on markets like, Korea, South Korea, Japan, continue to work into those markets, take what we can from China, okay? So in conclusion, I've probably gone longer than Jackie wanted me to. I apologize. Yes, I think prices are certainly heading higher. And you can read through my bullish and bearish points. I don't want to go on and on here, but I think the thing to be aware of is drought could potentially derail this, right? We may have to bring more cattle into feed yards. The other thing too would be interest rates, okay, and financial conditions. I think I already talked about where our interest costs have gone. We'd pay $20, $30 in interest for a yearling animal. Now it's $70 a head, okay? $50 a head difference. Leverage is going to favor the cattle feeder, all right? Packer margins could become bearish again, right? I mean, to prices. They could get so bad we start to downsize. It's new money, it's government money. I don't see that happening soon. We need to be aware of it. Grains, right? Demand, I think demand is good. But again, this inflationary period we're in, I think we just need to be aware. International market may disappoint for a moment, okay? So I've probably gone on long enough. Emissions, regulation policy, Mr. Wooten, Steve Wooten, Dr. Place are going to talk to you about, the global roundtable of sustainability. They're going to have a better grip on that, better information to share than I can, but it's just something we need to be aware of. And it's important to the market. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Billy. Let's give Billy a round of applause for sharing all that information with us.